Millionaire invited his poor ex-black wife to his wedding to humiliate her. Then, her arrival shocked everyone. Bill Tate stood frozen at his wedding altar, his face draining of color as a black Rolls-Royce pulled up to St. Matthew's Cathedral. His bride Jennifer whispered, "Who is that?" The entire wedding party turned as an elegantly dressed black woman stepped out in designer everything. Bill stammered, That's my ex-wife." The woman he had cast aside, humiliated, and left with nothing had just arrived at his perfect wedding in a car worth more than his first house. His hands trembled as 15 years of memories came flooding back. Memories of a love so pure it had once made him believe he could conquer the world. But how did we get here? Let me take you back to where it all began. If you love emotional and heartwarming stories, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comment where you're watching from, because this story is about to make you emotional. 15 years ago, Bill Tate was nobody special. A struggling tech entrepreneur working 16-hour days in a cramped startup office, driving a beat-up Honda, living in a tiny studio apartment with a mattress on the floor. But despite having nothing, he had everything that mattered: hope, determination, and a heart still capable of genuine love. That's where Diana Russo came in. At 27, she was a teacher working double shifts at an all-night diner to pay the bills, her dreams of changing young lives temporarily put on hold by the harsh reality of California rent prices. Bill would come in around midnight, order coffee and pie, and code until sunrise. There was something beautifully tragic about watching this man chase his dreams with nothing but caffeine and stubborn faith. One night, Diana's curiosity got the better of her. "What are you working on that keeps you up all night?" she asked, genuine interest sparkling in her eyes. Bill looked up from his screen, and for the first time in months, he saw someone who wasn't looking at his wrinkled clothes or three-day stubble with pity. She was looking at him like he mattered. As Bill explained his app idea, Diana found herself sliding into the booth across from him, genuinely fascinated, not just by his vision, but by the passion that lit up his entire face when he talked about it. She saw something in Bill that he couldn't see in himself. Not just the struggling guy society had written off, but the brilliant mind underneath, the integrity that made him tip her well even when counting every penny, the vulnerability that made him beautiful. Their courtship was pure and real in a world obsessed with appearances. Study sessions where Diana graded papers while Bill coded, both of them stealing glances and sharing dreams. Takeout dinners eaten from containers because they had no matching plates, but somehow those meals tasted better than any five-star restaurant. Their love existed in a bubble where ambition and affection danced together perfectly. When Bill finally worked up the courage to propose, his hands shook as he got down on one knee next to their mattress on the floor, holding a $200 pawnshop ring like it was the crown jewels. "Diana," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I don't have much to offer except my heart and a promise that I'll spend every day trying to build something worthy of you." Diana said yes before he even finished, tears streaming down her face. Not for what he might become, but for who he was in that moment. A man with integrity, dreams, and a heart big enough to see past their circumstances. Their wedding was at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning, chosen not for romance, but for the $20 filing fee. Diana wore a dress she'd sewn herself, staying up late for weeks to get every stitch perfect. The reception was coffee and donuts at the same diner where they'd met, but Diana had never been happier. She wasn't marrying potential. She was marrying the man who made her believe in tomorrow. What Diana didn't know was that her real work was just beginning. And that love, no matter how pure, couldn't always survive success. As Bill's app took off and his company grew, something inside him began to change, and Diana felt like she was watching the love of her life slowly die while his body remained. The humble man who had once been grateful for every small victory, who used to kiss her forehead and whisper, "We did it," after every milestone, slowly transformed into someone who believed his success had been inevitable, erasing her from the story of their shared dreams. Expensive clothes replaced his wrinkled shirts, but Diana mourned more than fabric. She mourned the man who used to be embarrassed by luxury, who once said he never wanted to become one of those people. Exclusive clubs replaced their cozy evenings at home where they used to plan their future together, curled up on their second-hand couch, dreaming of the life they would build. A new social circle replaced the people who had known him when he was nobody, and Diana realized with growing horror that she was becoming part of the past he wanted to forget. Diana watched the man she loved disappear piece by piece, each change feeling like a small death. Her heart broke a little more each time he looked at her with mild embarrassment instead of adoration, each time he corrected her pronunciation in front of his new friends, each time he made comments about her not fitting in with his crowd. "Maybe you should get a personal stylist, Diana. First impressions matter in this world," he said one evening, his tone casual but his words cutting through her heart like broken glass. The man who once told her she was beautiful in sweatpants was now ashamed of how she looked. She tried to adapt, spending money they couldn't afford on clothes that felt like costumes, tried to become the woman he seemed to want, but she felt like she was suffocating, losing herself in the desperate attempt to hold on to a man who was already gone. However, there came Jennifer Hayes, a 28-year-old blonde socialite from old money, everything Diana wasn't, and everything Bill's new world expected. Jennifer was born into the sophistication Diana was desperately trying to learn. Effortlessly elegant in ways that made Diana feel like a fraud in her own skin. Bill met her at a charity gala Diana had organized, pouring her heart into helping underprivileged children while unknowingly setting the stage for her own destruction. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her later. She had literally introduced her husband to his replacement. The attraction was immediate. Not love, but the intoxicating pull of status and acceptance. Diana watched from across the room as Bill's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't for her in months. Saw how he straightened his shoulders and smiled differently when Jennifer laughed at his jokes. She knew in that moment, with the devastating clarity that only comes with true heartbreak, that she had already lost him. The months that followed were a slow-motion nightmare. Diana felt like she was drowning, while everyone around her pretended the water was fine. Bill stayed out later, traveled more frequently for business, and looked at Diana like she was a stranger who had wandered into his life by mistake. The silence in their house became deafening, filled with all the words they weren't saying, and all the love that was dying by degrees. 2 years ago, Bill blindsided Diana with divorce papers, delivered by a lawyer who spoke about her like she was a business liability to be handled efficiently and quietly. The settlement offer was a modest $200,000, a fraction of what she deserved after sacrificing her teaching career, her dreams, her very identity for his success. The number felt like a slap across the face, a final insult that quantified exactly how little 15 years of her life was worth to him. "Diana, we've grown apart. You don't understand my world anymore," Bill said with the cold detachment of a stranger conducting a business meeting, looking right through the woman who had held his head when he cried about failed coding attempts, who had worked double shifts to keep them afloat while he chased his dreams, who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. The man who once promised to love her forever was now explaining why forever had an expiration date. Diana's response was dignified, despite her shattered heart. "I won't fight you for money, Bill, but you'll regret this." The words came out steady and strong, but inside she was dying. 15 years of love, sacrifice, and partnership reduced to a legal document and a check that wouldn't even buy a decent car. She felt like she was attending her own funeral while still breathing. Bill spread rumors throughout their social circle that Diana had been holding him back, rewriting their history to make himself the hero and her the obstacle he had courageously overcome. He convinced everyone, including himself, that he'd built everything alone, erasing her contributions like she had never existed. Diana lost friends who chose sides or simply found it easier to believe his version of events. Each lost relationship another knife twist in her already bleeding heart. She struggled to rebuild, not just her life but her sense of self-worth, moving to a small apartment that felt like a prison after the mansion they'd shared, eating dinner alone at a table for one while trying not to remember all the dreams they'd planned over candlelit meals. The silence was crushing. broken only by her own tears and the sound of a life falling apart. The nights were the worst. Diana would lie awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and wondering how 15 years of love could disappear so completely, how someone could know every inch of your soul and then look at you like you were a stranger. She grieved not just for her marriage, but for the naive woman she'd been, who believed that love was enough, that loyalty mattered, that building something together meant you got to keep it together. But in that small apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of her old life, in the depths of grief so profound it felt like physical pain, Diana made a decision that would change everything. She looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror, eyes red from crying, and spoke to her reflection with the first real conviction she'd felt in months. He threw me away like I was nothing. But I am not nothing. I will not disappear just because he wants me to. She wouldn't just survive. She would rise. And when she did, Bill Tate would discover that discarding Diana Russo was the biggest mistake of his pathetic, hollow life. 2 years later, the society pages couldn't stop gushing about Bill and Jennifer's upcoming wedding, the event of the year at $300,000. Every detail was a monument to excess, a celebration of everything Bill had become and everything he'd left behind. Diana was sorting through her mail on a quiet Tuesday evening when she found it, an envelope so elegant it seemed to mock her modest surroundings. Inside was an invitation that took her breath away, not for its beauty, but for its calculated cruelty. The return address showed it came from Bill personally, not an oversight, but a deliberate choice. He wants to humiliate me, Diana realized, her hands trembling as the full weight of his intention hit her. He wants to parade his new life in front of me, show everyone how much better off he is without the woman who sacrificed everything for his dreams. The invitation wasn't just paper and ink. It was a weapon designed to destroy what was left of her dignity. But what Bill didn't know was that Diana had spent those 2 years transforming her pain into power. Late nights that once meant grading papers now meant building business strategies. The tears she'd cried over their broken marriage had watered the seeds of an empire he never saw coming. Diana called her business partner Reynolds, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions in her chest. I think it's time to execute the Tate acquisition. While Bill planned his perfect wedding, Diana had been building a consulting empire with tentacles reaching into every corner of Silicon Valley. Her clients weren't just any companies. They were Bill's biggest competitors and major investors, drawn to her brilliant mind and the integrity Bill had thrown away. For 2 years, Diana's firm had documented Bill's business practices with the thoroughness of someone who understood both love and betrayal. She'd discovered he was embezzling company funds for his lavish lifestyle. The wedding, the Maserati, the Napa trips, all paid for with stolen money. Every luxury was built on lies, just like their marriage had been destroyed by them. Diana presented her findings to Tate Tech's board of directors with the same calm professionalism that had once comforted Bill during his panic attacks about failed investors. Their vote was unanimous. They wanted Diana's firm to take over as interim management. In one meeting, Diana went from discarded ex-wife to controlling her former husband's company. The irony was poetic. The woman he'd said didn't understand his world had just become its master. If you're thinking this can't get more intense, hit that subscribe button because the real fireworks are about to begin. The morning of the wedding, Diana stood in front of her mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she chose her outfit like a general preparing for the most important battle of her life. Her reflection stared back, a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself stronger. Not for revenge, but for dignity. The Navy Chanel suit wasn't just fabric, it was armor forged from years of tears and sleepless nights. The diamond earrings weren't just jewelry. They were proof, written in precious stones, that she had not just survived the hell Bill put her through, but thrived in ways he never thought possible. Her heart pounded as she applied her lipstick with steady hands that betrayed none of the storm raging inside her. Today, she would face the man who had carved out her heart and left her to bleed alone. The Westbrook Country Club hosted 200 of the West Coast's elite, all gathered to witness what they thought was Bill's ultimate triumph. Bill stood at the altar in his $5,000 tuxedo, his smile radiating the arrogance of a man who believed he had finally escaped his past. Jennifer glowed beside him in her $15,000 Vera wine gown, a living symbol of everything he thought he deserved. Everything was perfect, orchestrated, to announce to the world that Bill Tate had finally claimed his rightful place among the powerful. The society crowd whispered about whether the poor ex-wife would show up, their voices dripping with the kind of pity that felt more like poison. They expected a broken woman living in poverty, someone they could look down on while feeling grateful for their own good fortune. In their minds, Diana was already a tragic footnote in Bill's success story. Then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of real power arriving, the deep, confident purr of an engine that commanded respect. The Rolls-Royce that pulled up wasn't just expensive. It was a statement that made every other luxury car in the lot look like children's toys. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and the very air seemed to shift. Diana stepped out like she owned not just the car, but the entire world around it. The navy Chanel suit hugged her frame perfectly, the diamond earrings caught the afternoon light like captured stars, and her sophisticated chignon spoke of power earned through blood, sweat, and tears, not inherited through privilege. Every step she took was deliberate, purposeful, radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through fire and emerged as flame itself. This wasn't the struggling woman they'd expected. This was someone who had taken her pain and forged it into something magnificent, something that made the assembled elite suddenly question their own accomplishments. Bill's face went from wedding day pink to corpse white, as 15 years of memories crashed over him like a devastating tsunami. His knees nearly buckled as recognition hit him like a physical blow. This was Diana, but not Diana. This was who she'd become without him dragging her down, who she'd always been capable of being if he'd had the vision to see past his own selfishness. The woman he'd thrown away like garbage had transformed into royalty. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as panic set in. This wasn't supposed to happen. Diana was supposed to stay broken, stay small, stay in the past where he'd buried her. Jennifer looked confused and increasingly alarmed as she watched her husband-to-be crumble at the sight of a woman in a business suit. Fear crept into her eyes as she realized something was very, very wrong. Diana took her seat in the back, saying nothing because her presence screamed everything. She was no longer the woman who had begged him not to leave. She was the woman who had learned to leave him behind in the dust of her success. As Bill stumbled through his vows, his voice cracking on words he'd practiced 100 times, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air, Diana remained perfectly composed. She sat like a queen observing peasants, untouchable and serene. When the minister asked for objections, the moment hung in the air like a held breath, the entire wedding party sensing that something earth-shattering was about to happen. Diana stood up with fluid grace, and 200 people felt the temperature in the room plummet. "I object. Not to this marriage, but to the lies." Her voice carried across the silent crowd with the authority of someone who had learned that truth was the most devastating weapon of all. She pulled out legal documents with the calm precision of an executioner, each page representing months of careful investigation and years of betrayal finally coming to light. "Bill, you forgot to mention something important to your lovely bride. As of yesterday, I own 51% of Tate Tech." The gasps that erupted weren't just surprise. They were the sound of a carefully constructed illusion shattering in real time, like glass breaking in slow motion. Jennifer's bouquet hit the ground like a fallen crown, orchids scattering like her dreams. "What is she talking about, Bill?" Jennifer's voice cracked with the dawning realization that the man she was about to marry was a complete stranger, that her fairy tale was actually a nightmare in disguise. Bill's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from his face as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. The woman he discarded had just revealed herself as the puppet master pulling his strings. Diana explained with the calm professionalism of someone delivering a death sentence. While Bill was planning this beautiful wedding, he was embezzling company funds to pay for it. The board discovered his theft and asked my consulting firm to take control. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his reputation. Bill's desperate croak, "Diana, you can't do this," was the sound of a man watching his carefully built world collapse in real time, his voice breaking like a child's. "I'm not doing anything, Bill. Your choices did this. I'm simply the consequence you never saw coming." But Diana had one more surprise, one that would transform this moment from personal vindication to something that would restore her faith in justice itself. "I want everyone here to know, I'm not keeping the company. I'm restructuring Tate Tech as an employee-owned cooperative. Every person Bill fired to boost his profits is getting their job back with full benefits. Every client he overcharged gets refunds with interest." The crowd's stunned silence gave way to something else, the overwhelming realization that they weren't witnessing revenge, but justice in its purest form. This wasn't about a bitter ex-wife destroying a man. This was about making things right for everyone he'd stepped on during his ruthless climb to the top. Jennifer, still standing at the altar in her ruined wedding gown, looked at Bill with eyes that finally saw the truth through her tears. The devastation on her face wasn't just for her shattered wedding day, but for the painful realization of who she'd almost married. A man capable of betraying the person who had loved him most. "I can't marry someone who would betray the person who loved them most," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word as courage replaced confusion. She pulled off her engagement ring, paid for with stolen money, and let it fall at Bill's feet like a final judgment. "If you could do this to her, what would you eventually do to me?" The ring hit the ground with a sound that echoed like thunder in the absolute silence. Bill stood alone at the altar, the tech mogul worth $50 million revealed as a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. Not just Diana, but his own soul, his integrity, his future. He was surrounded by 200 people but had never been more alone in his life. Diana didn't gloat or celebrate. She had learned that true victory doesn't need an audience or applause. "I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening," she said with the grace of someone who had found peace in the ashes of her old life, her voice carrying a dignity that made the assembled elite feel small. Walking toward her Rolls-Royce with her head held high, she turned back one final time, not to twist the knife, but to offer something Bill probably didn't deserve, but that Diana needed to give for her own healing. "Bill," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly across the devastated garden, "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted you to remember who you used to be. The man I fell in love with would never have done what you did. I hope someday you find your way back to him." Her words hit him harder than any accusation could have, because they carried the weight of genuine sorrow for the good man he'd once been. Diana drove away in peace, not triumph. As her Rolls-Royce disappeared into the distance, she finally felt the crushing weight of 15 years lift from her shoulders. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well and staying true to who you are when the world tries to convince you that you're not enough. She'd learned that real success isn't measured in dollars or designer clothes, but in dignity, integrity, and the courage to choose justice over vengeance. Bill had thrown away the best thing that ever happened to him because he thought he deserved something better. Diana had learned that her worth was never determined by someone else's ability to see it. In the end, the woman everyone had expected to be broken had shown them what it really meant to be whole. She had turned her pain into power, her betrayal into triumph, and her broken heart into an unbreakable spirit. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.